So I've been getting a lot of requests to do all kinds of different individual objects. And so I want to kind of recap the channel here real quick. Just do some reminders on what 3D modeling actually is. So first, when you're working in Blender, the main thing is that you have only so many faces you can use. There's triangles, there's quads, and then of course your n-gons, right? But your models are made of vertices, edges, and then you have vertices that are n-poles with 3 edges coming out of it. You have vertices that are e-poles with 5 or more edges coming out up to an infinite amount. All of your 3D models will have this, period. Like that's what's going to happen in Blender anyways. So the edge flows and everything else, as far as like subdivision modeling goes, it's not as hard as you think. There's always this term that pops up. Everybody's like, I want advanced 3D modeling techniques. And there's not really. It's about just manipulating these building blocks into the shapes that you need them to be. So it's helpful to do breakdowns sometimes, but as a beginner, it's really hard to understand this to a degree. Now, if you're going to do subdivision surface modeling, you know that you need 3 edges to hold a curve. So when you see curves, you should be thinking 3 edges, right? And that'll be your setup there for the most part at its most basic fundamental levels. And so you should be identifying areas that might be a little bit more flat, thinking of those as planes perhaps, right? Okay, and then that's all you're doing for these. You're just breaking them down in your head on how you're going to make them, how many edges you might need. You don't have to draw them out like this either. You just start looking at them and thinking like, where are these edges going to go, you know? Like you might have to make a quad that like folds in over on itself, you know? Doing something like that almost right there. You're identifying shapes like this. You're not worrying about those small bevels, all right? You're just worrying about the big overall shapes first. This is your blockout mesh, more or less, when you start modeling. Okay. That's the kind of form you're creating. Remember, shapes are 2D, forms are 3D. And even if there's not an edge for it, you know, look for those little areas on where they're lining up with each other. You're creating a big n-gon, something like this, right? Well, you can convert n-gons into quads. You see where I'm going with this? They're very simple, usually, the topology anyways. This is a big rectangular plane, basically. Right there. Later on, you add the details, the stitching and all that. You might break this up even more, who knows? But you start with the basic stuff first. You don't go straight to the most complicated things necessarily. Sometimes you have to kind of, but you'll find a balance for this. And so a lot of people just ask, you know, how do I learn how to do this? Well, start practicing on basic models like this, right? Like if you see a chair and you want to model this thing out, start thinking about how you're going to lay out that topology, how it might actually work out here. So you'll realize we have these really small curves in here, right? And if you want to model those, you're going to end up needing 3 edges for that. Okay, so this gets us into the density part of it, right? We know what quads look like, but if you have a grid of quads, right? And then you have another grid of quads, those are different densities, right? That's your mesh resolution, more or less. And so a lot of times when you're starting these blockouts, you're ignoring all the finer detail and you're just doing the basic overall shape, you know? You're not doing the every little beveled corner right away. And so you'll find that you can start to work these out later on, perhaps, and add additional edges or do like a subdivision and then apply it and then, you know, maybe sharpen these corners back up and do things like that. So all in all, this becomes pretty standard kind of way of working. You kind of get used to this idea of being able to lay out grids like this where you'll need additional elements and support and all that other fun stuff, right? So I've already done this to some degree, something like this anyways, in Blender. I'm going to do it again real quick. But actually, before we do that, when we look at other elements, like other things, other objects, let me do, yeah, overlay. Okay. You're looking at something like this. This is a basically a big compound object, right? There's just tons of stuff on here. There's all kinds of things to make. You're going to be making this guy back here. He's already complicated enough. And then you'll be doing this one up front. That's pretty complicated as is for a beginner, right? You'll be doing that one. And then you have all these little elements on top of everything. So you have like big details, small details. Got like this pipe going through here. We have these little latches or whatever, clamps. And then we have like these repeated elements as well. You're looking for things that repeat usually too. These are good ones to make. These little valves, right? Valve handle, actual valve here. So we can make all of those. We can make the pipes on this modular if we wanted to. You don't have to, but it'd be useful because this piece kind of repeats in several areas by the looks of it. To some degree anyways. You might be able to reuse it more than, like realistically, these might be different, but you could probably reuse it, to be honest. You got to model that thing, all your pipe sections, you know. So you might make like a little mini modular pipe kit. And you could use it on this, but because of the way industrial environments work out, usually, this is a boiler, by the way, but the way industrial environments work out, a lot of these pipes are used all over the different machines and stuff. So, you know, this could be an excellent place to start reusing things. Also, like these cabinets like this, you can see if you make, you know, dozens of these things, do you have to texture them all uniquely, or could you use like material blending to basically make all of these like using the same 3 materials or so, 4 materials? Possibly could do that. So you can make all kinds of different cabinets. You have details on top of the surface, so you got to model all your details. And this is just a way of breaking things down, right? Like you're looking for individual objects, trying to understand these things, but then you're looking for, or you're thinking about it at least, and it's kind of hard on this one because it's so small in resolution, but now you're still thinking about these edges, like how you're going to actually lay these things out here with topology, right? As you're doing each piece, you got to think about how you're going to make this pipe work. A lot of detail in here. Now, there's also another trick to this. While you could try to model all of this, the sculpting tools in Blender can also be utilized to help you create additional details sometimes, more like surface details. Depends on the object, and you have to really get the hang of it before you try to utilize it, but it could be a potential, right? A lot of little things like this, you know, these are going to be like compound shapes. So even something like this, it seems simple enough, kind of, for you guys that are just getting started. It's simple, right? But this is the shape you're trying to create here, right? And then later on, you do the Boolean, it subtracts inside of it. Then you do a Boolean union that adds that plastic piece back, right? So it's really like 3 shapes you're making, and there's a cylinder in here. So like it's about 4 or 5 shapes for that. You Boolean it all together on more of a block out kind of simplified mesh there. It'll be pretty close to what you want. And then you could convert it into subdivision if you wanted to. So there's always tricks like that. But, you know, once again, sculpt tools are available. So if some things seem like they'd be easier to use sculpting tools, you might be able to do that. This one, I don't know if I would try to sculpt much on it, but that car seat, for example, the racing seat, you could sculpt a number of things on this and actually have a lot of fun with it. Stitching and stuff like that. Potentially, actually modeling the stitching and laying it out on the surface is actually pretty good with Bezier curves and things like that. So, but just identifying these shapes is super useful. And where you're wondering where a lot of these like sci-fi designs come from, it's things like this. They're not as much sci-fi as you think as they are just like real world designs that people either recreate or they actually modify and come up with similar looking designs and things like that, right? So this kind of stuff can be very complicated in nature. It's not really advanced per se. There's times that you're going to execute it when you increase the resolution, right? You want to prep your lower poly mesh to get ready to do a higher poly mesh. with all these kind of details on it. So it's an iterative process. You start kind of simple. You start really thinking about how that topology works before you move on to trying to push all this stuff in, perhaps. And then once again, you can use sculpting tools, right? So it's not even necessary that you have to like hand model all of this or push and pull polygons around. Sometimes you can actually just get away with sculpting it. But we're looking at little like sharper edges, perhaps. I can't even draw that one. Looking at curves, so we're thinking about edges there, right? All these different things, right? Okay, so this is why I recommend highly, and I've shown on the channel a lot, you know, working with planes. Planes force you to think about the shape. That's all it's really doing. When you're using like big cylinders and big boxes to do things, it's a great way to just like get placement of things, sizes, and the big generic forms and the relations to one another. But the planes force you to think about things like this, right? So let me actually go back through real quick and put that on the other screen. And turn that wireframe off. I don't want to see that right now. So I've already gone through and started this one up. And you can see, like, what the heck happened here? Like, how do you even get to this point? Making something even near that detail level, right? So first, planes. All right. I recommend highly just learning to work with the planes first. That way you don't have to worry about the backside. You don't have to worry about all kinds of other nonsense. But like this main little middle section, remember? Oh, that was the wrong one. Let's go the other way. There. This little main middle section, this is more or less a rectangle. This is like that n-gon shape. So that's what we're doing right now. So we could think something like this maybe. Right? And that's all that is right there for the most part, as far as I can tell. It's nothing really too crazy about that one. We see these edges over here. Remember? I was sketching this out earlier. I was just marking some stuff like this. This is planes going up and down, right? Or faces, quads. You can do that on a lot of stuff like this, right? Anytime you can identify a flat section, it's usually useful. So if I wanted to, I'm using that as my reference actually, but if I wanted to go ahead and start modeling some things like this out, I'll borrow this edge, duplicate it, Shift D, get it positioned to about where I need it. In our case, it's going to go down here. And a lot of times I kind of like free move things around too. Get it to about the right thickness. And you can see just eyeballing it. It'd be helpful if you had better references, but that's kind of the shape there. I mean, it's really nothing more than that. It's pretty simplistic in nature. So as you're making all the other elements, you can start to basically just work them out more or less. Might take you a little bit of time to get used to doing this, but this is why blockouts are so important. This rough modeling at the beginning of things. As if you're making seats or making whatever, you know. This is kind of how they go sometimes. This actually comes out. So I'm just pushing and pulling right now. I'm not doing anything fancy. And that's the main thing I want to show in this video is that it's just pushing and pulling is like step one to getting better at this. Eventually you'll find ways to use booleans and bevels and weighted bevels and all other fun stuff. But this is just the starting point really, and it can be quite useful. So I'm trying to figure out how I want to run this in this area. So at some point this comes all the way out and it starts to become thick. You can wait to do thicknesses later usually, but this one's going to start to rotate, you see? And it's going to go into somewhere down here, like right here almost. It's going to start going this way. And you want to use vertex snapping too, so you can just snap things if needed. It gets a little bit squirrely sometimes, but it's still useful. So at some point, maybe I start doing something like that. AM merge by distance, snap that to there, merge that to there, AM merge by distance. You see, and all those little selection methods I was showing in the Blender 4.2 video, kind of that little crash course video I tried to do. This is where this all starts to come back together, basically, like being able to control your mesh with the hotkeys, the shortcuts, quick favorites, all the different tools you might need, like boundary selecting and all that other fun stuff. Super useful. And we're just trying to get the overall shapes and forms right now. We're not trying to make great looking mesh yet. You know, that's the main thing here for these. You can shift and pull things around, and we can add additional edges if needed, and maybe not. What's going on with that one right yet? It's just going to be a triangle for now. We'll figure it out later. I'll bring this one up. Do a loop cut here, fill. Is that right? I don't know. The topology is about solving, right? Like it's always about just getting it going in the direction you need it to go. Creating the edge flows you want, basically, for your object. Edge flows are hugely important. Don't forget about them. I don't know what's going to happen in here, so I'm just going to fill it with a triangle for now. Suspect I got to bring this out still. You see where that's going? You might need a loop cut to match to the outer edge. So we can do some fills. Pressing F, right? Triangle, well, could almost become a quad, right? Like that. Is that right? Probably not. There's a good odd chance that's wrong. But I don't know. Maybe it works for us. Who knows? Kind of works, right? Try things. Experiment. Don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to destroy your mesh. You know, I think that's one of the big things that beginners often have problems with. They're worried that if they do something and they screw it up, they won't be able to fix it. And that's true to some degree. You're not going to maybe know how to fix everything that you might mess up. But it's definitely worth experimenting and trying to figure out, you know, how to run edges and cuts and loops, and just do these as practice exercises. Don't think about making something for your portfolio always. That puts a lot of pressure on yourself to create something that's awesome, you know, when in reality you're still learning. And it's better to not get too wound up over that idea of just being an awesome artist yet. You definitely want to spend some time just playing in 3D, right? At the end of the day, if you treat this more like a video game, like it is playing, you'll have a much better time anyways. So you can see I do that number, inset, hold control, push it in, delete, right? I got a cutout there for it. It's not perfect. This one, we could do the same thing. Scale it. See, this isn't flat. GG twice, GG twice. Boom, now it's flat. Little trick there for that one. Just flatten them out real quick like that. Okay, and so we're on our way at least, right? We're getting these shapes started. That's the main thing. Now, of course, I had more kind of cool stuff going on over here. You can use proportional edit. You can use mouse wheel up and down. You can kind of change the shapes of things and do whatever else you want to do, right? With proportional edit anyways. Let's turn that off. There's something not working right here. I don't know what it is. Okay, it's not merged apparently. Sometimes Blender doesn't merge quite the way you want. So you do like you could do like level 1 subdivisions, turn off optimal display, you'll see what your topology is doing. And so you can see we got an in pole here, we got an e pole here. Some of this is not so bad. Some of it you might want to change. Like if you can avoid using e poles or in poles, then it's more ideal. You can see just cutting a big we had an n-gon. N-gons turn into in pole, or excuse me, n-gons turn into e poles. Triangles turn into end poles. So when you cut it in half and turn it back into quads, it probably will still have the e-pole. It just might shift the position of it around. So it's little things like that. And that's why I was saying all those things are really your fundamental building blocks. Like you cannot get away from them really to some extent. I don't want to change the shape too much because you can see we're starting to lose it now, but If we need additional loop cuts, we might have to add them. That's fine. That's going to hold those a little bit sharper there, make it more squared out. But there's a good odd chance when you do that level 1 subdivision, at some point you apply it, you might have most of the shape here that you need. So you might be able to just like re-straighten these a little and then maybe pull that one down. Okay. And so when you subdivide again, you're still going to get that shape, you see? So you can't be afraid of your mesh. That's what I'm trying to drive home here. Why using blockouts are so important, because it allows you to control things. And then as you want to add more and more detail, you can take up the resolution. And, maybe you don't like the way this started going inwards here. So you dissolve some edges and you do a loop cut, and it kind of chamfers it out a little bit more, perhaps, right? Maybe that's something that you want to occur. You could do that. And so it starts simple. It can become very complicated, though, especially with things like this. Obviously, we lost our shape here almost entirely, right? So we're going to either spend some time trying to reposition everything, and it may or may not go exactly the way we anticipate or plan, because we have too much geometry now. So having done loop cuts on this one beforehand would have probably been more beneficial. You'll find that there's times that you want to do that. Like, you can use cursor selector with C, by the way, if you want to use that instead. But yeah, there might be times you want to actually, like review your mesh after applying the subdivision and just make sure everything's kind of close to what you need it to be. In our case, I'm pretty used to just moving things manually. And so I can probably recover most of that shape. It's not going to be a big deal. Maybe I don't want to move that one there or something. But at worst case, you GG twice, right? You can still do that with the whole edge and flatten things out. But you're not going to be able to do it across the big piece. So like this one, we could do that, right? This one, we can definitely run that way. And you'll also notice that if we had like 2 additional edges in here, what we'd find is that we could sandwich these into the corners, perhaps like this, and not have any issues with it being sharper. Which, you don't necessarily have to do either. You could always try, adding more cuts in here later on and trying to work out some new stuff, perhaps, but a little bit more of a slower process, more tedious, perhaps. Nonetheless, I think we're okay-ish with it. It's not perfect. It could definitely be more flattened and straightened out and stuff, but definitely needs to be sharper. All right. Now, with all that out of the way, I wanted to run through this like this for a very specific reason. We're going to get rid of the subdivision entirely for a second. This thing had actual panels in it. Like, so these seats like this, you don't think of them as panels, but when these are stitched and sewn together, usually they're cut out as a shape template, and then they're all put together and stitched together, right? So this is our shape here, but there's like a seam here, and it's just sewn together. Basic idea? Okay. We need to cut these out usually in order to get all this other stuff kind of made the way we want. So you'll see what I'm talking about. But to cut things, I've already made a number of videos talking about cutting things up, but we'll go over some more of that. So let me try to look at that while I do this, though. We are looking at a cut from somewhere up here, like this corner. This like comes up through here. This is our cut. And it goes to not quite midway. It goes to somewhere like this. Maybe a little bit further in, but more like that. And then it goes down to like here, maybe. Okay. So it's very easy to get messed up over this idea of doing these kinds of cuts. It's not as bad as you probably think it is. A lot of times you can just shift the topology around a little bit. It's not going to be the end of the world. We have a denser mesh now. It's much easier to do that. Yes, we might have triangles. We can work that stuff out later on if needed. But the main idea is we're trying to get these kind of cuts going anyways. So I want to take this edge, and you want to do all of these panel lines kind of at the same time, usually. But I want to select the panel lines I know we need. Which I cut this too low, actually. Let's do... And at the wrong angle. Okay, so this is supposed to be higher, so I actually cut it wrong. This needs to go down to about here, I think. Somewhere like right here. And we'll send it all the way down. A nice straight line going. Okay. Notice the knife tool selects it still. That's nice. I like that. Right. So there, we got this going. And I'm not worried about the other side because we're going to do a symmetrize with a mesh machine there. But basically, you bevel, mouse wheel up once. So you have 3 edges. Okay. Control number pad minus and select less. And now you can do like an Alt S and push these in a little bit if you wanted to. Okay. When I symmetrize this, it'll be cut up like this now. See? So we can grab these edges again. We want to do this kind of in a particular order if we can get a hold of it. Okay, see we got this selected through here, all the way through here, and we want to go all the way through here. We're going to use select loops. We're going to be using boundary loops and loop inner region. I have them on shortcut. So inner loop region should select one whole side of this, right? Like that. And I'm just going to separate it. And then now we can come down here and we can do the same thing with these sections like this. Alt shift click, right? Select inner loop region, separate. You see where that went? Okay, so this is where it gets tricky. This is how you come up with this setup here, right? That's exactly what's already occurred. And yes, I have other things going on, but we'll talk about that in a sec. If we go into sculpt mode and hit like Control 2, make sure you have no subdivision. Alt Q, you should be able to switch between objects and hit Control 2. Okay, Alt Q, Control 2. You can take the resolution up higher if you want, but just giving you an idea here on how you can work with these meshes. The big one's going to be auto masking, mesh boundary. And you can use anything you want here as far as sculpt tools for the most part, and they won't mess up the mesh boundary. Now, some of the tools I think still do, but usually they don't. So if you want to Alt Q to this and you want to inflate this area, for example, you can do this. This is not a problem. If you want to use like the cloth filter inflate, Alt Q down here, like we can do that too. If we want to give it like a little bit of a fluffiness to it, right? You see? Like there's all kinds of stuff like this we can do still. Using the cloth sculpt tool, you can drag a little, add some roughness, right? We want to use creases, set pin pressure sensitivity, use a drawing graphics tablet, stylus. We can do creases, we can resharpen things. And we're not influencing the boundaries because the boundaries need to line up with each other, right? Otherwise, this whole thing breaks. So this is why a lot of you guys, I keep emphasizing subdivision. In reality, a lot of guys take their meshes, their base meshes anyways, they take them to ZBrush and do stuff like this. But if you're not going to use ZBrush, multi-res with subdivision surface is actually one of the better ways of working in Blender. And so you can see, like this is all just starting to work out here. It's one to actually split up fairly well in this corner here. There are going to be times you have to go back through. I want to just mention this. Turn this off real quick. You're probably going to have to go back through on some things and clean them up. And you're going to have to run a sidewalk a lot of times through these areas like this, okay? You want to do this before you move into sculpting. But that's the main idea, is that eventually you might need to do that sidewalk. Because if you don't do that first, and you start coming in here trying to sculpt, you might run into a serious issue with that, where it like messes up your vertices and stuff. So you just want to be careful. Usually you can smooth the vertices back out if you ever run into that, but you want to just be careful with it, all right? And so this was more like a nylon or something, some kind of cloth fabric. But the rare odd instance you had like leathers and things like that. You can see where this goes. Like we can come in here and we can start to sculpt on this if we have more subdivisions, obviously. Don't take it over 6 though. Usually anything over 6 just stops working, doesn't look right, doesn't work right. But you could like feather some of this in. You can create some little creases, like little effects like this. So a lot of times using the cloth filter is great, but you can hand sculpt things all day long when it comes to like fabrics and wrinkles and stuff like that, right? It's just like doing terrain, like that terrain video I made. It's not too much different than that. And you smooth it out a little bit. I think you see where that's going, right? So this is possible. It's very easy to do this. You can do this on any subdivision surface that you made. Go back through, like, I don't know what I'm doing right here, but it seemed like a good idea. Anyways, yeah, so if you want to make some cool looking stuff, there you go. That's how you do that. Make a good subdivision mesh. You can even symmetrize these if you wanted to. Bump up the viewport display if you want to see it still. Right. So yeah, that's that pretty much in a nutshell. Here we go. Let's do this section. I'm going to dissolve this edge inside so it becomes more chamfered-like. All right. And I'm going to grab this whole section. I'm going to inset this and hold control and push it in a little bit real quick. Actually, that turned out terrible. Let's not do that. Let's do boundary select and then do a bevel. Change the shape to a 1, do 2 segments. Okay, I want to take this edge here. I'm just going to push this in a little bit like that. And this whole element here, I'm going to grab it, press P and separate selection. Okay, and you can see what's going on here now. So if I want to inset and hold control, I should be able to push it out a little bit. Ooh, that's terrible. Actually, what's going on here with this one? Let me try scaling it in a little bit and see if that helps. Trying to get just a flat section here like this. I think the multi-res on it's messing it up. We'll just use a subdivision on this one. All right. And because it's not quite going the way I anticipated it to go, I'm going to extrude this. And hopefully we can get above that surface there a little bit. Yeah, that's a little too far for my taste. I think I'm going to leave it just like that. We'll do a couple loop cuts in here. And pull that back. Do a quick extrusion on it, just a little bit. Shade it smooth. All right, so this is what's cool about this. You don't always have to have your mesh match each other. Like I'm just doing loop cuts in the corners now. I want these tighter, basically. I don't want them to be rounded. So as long as we got good kind of mesh alignment here, which apparently is not going as good as I was hoping it would. I thought it would go a little bit better than this, but we are all over the map on this one. I want to do a bevel on this as well, or a chamfer at least, right? So when this subdivides, let's go to sculpt mode. I think I inflated it too much is what happened. We could use a mesh eraser or the multi-res eraser on this edge. See what it does here for a second. All right, it's not too bad. It is curving in a little bit too much. So having a couple extra loop cuts probably would not hurt here, to be honest. So matching them wouldn't be a bad idea. The problem is you're going to run into is that it's just sometimes easier said than done. I just did a knife cut there and made it basically a triangle instead on that one. Sometimes you got to go to these extremes, I guess. But getting a little bit messy, to be honest. This is not usually the case. You don't want to try to make things too messy. All right, we managed to get something going here. You'll notice that now that we have this kind of topo here, it doesn't sculpt as good, right? That's why you want to try to avoid E-poles and N-poles, because usually these things don't smooth out quite as well. You'll see little artifacts sometimes. They don't deform very well if you're trying to deform things. But like we can do this all day long, basically. We can go back through, we can smooth it, we can use scrapers. We're making a high poly model right now, not the low poly model, right? So if we're trying to do game art and we need high polys, this is a good way to go. But you'll have to go through and create a low poly on top of this more than likely. Not as much fun, but it just means retop will work to some degree, even though it's a multi-res. You might be able to save the base mesh and use that as your low poly or like optimize it basically. That's not always the case. So, all right. So you can see we have control over this area now though, which is nice. So if we need to sculpt in this area in particular, you see like we don't have much resolution here. And it's a little bit messy. Subdivide more. Subdivide more. You can take these up pretty high too. They don't have to be low res. You see those poles now starting to have an influence here? That's why you want to avoid those, make better, cleaner topology than I just did, but certainly is doable. I don't know if we actually need that one. See, it messes it up. Like I was saying though, the smooth tool will usually fix that. Get a little bit tricky though. Make sure you have that boundary good. You don't want to shift that boundary at all usually. But a lot of times you can work things like that back out. Got another nice pole in there. Pushing a pole towards an edge sometimes can be useful. Got two poles now. Merge that one up. Let's pull that one down, maybe. Let's dissolve through here. We do have a triangle. That's going to create a pole, but I feel like just one pole is probably better than two poles, right? All right. Anyway, so you getting the idea now? Like, can we do just crazy stuff? Yeah, absolutely. Do we even need to do the seams like this necessarily? Not entirely. It's not always true. It works out better in my opinion, but if you want to try to sculpt in panel lines and stuff, like that's a possibility. It's hard to keep them just the way you want them though. I would do this for concepting when you're coming up with an initial design. You can start to figure out like where you want things to be, and then later on model on top of that, like concept sculpt. And you know, concept sculpts can start with modeling as well. Like they're not, it's not like all set in stone. Like there's one way of working. There's tons of different little tricks you can use to get from point A to point B, basically. You see with that smooth up that sharp or that strong, it's just not working out well there. Work it back down. But usually this turns out pretty nice, especially if you take the time to get the topology, you know, more correct than I did. You can definitely do this. But you can see stitching would be a little bit rough. It's just too high resolution usually. So you would definitely want to take your time and do a stitch model and then go lay it out everywhere. The Bezier curve, following the curve and all that. I had an idea for that, but I don't know if it worked out. Yeah, it's just not enough resolution for that, right? Possible though. Let's do like Alt Q. I do symmetry. Subdivide it a few more times. See, feathering, like where you're doing short strokes, very light with pin pressure sensitivity, I think works pretty well on this. But actually, in reality, I don't even know if you do it that way. I like doing it that way, but it's not the best. So I'm gonna show you the best. That's probably a mask tool is usually the better option. Because if you mess up, you can go back and fix it. A lot of times you can get these in a single stroke too, which I'm failing at miserably, but all right. Let's try something like that. We'll see what happens. I really should clear up the edges. But anyways, you can press A, invert the mask, use mesh filter. You can use cloth filter, inflate. Actually, this was fun. We'll do this. You see? Make it inflated. Cool. Let's make it look a little bit more stiff by scraping it. Maybe a little smaller, a little bit less strength. Chamfer that area a little. And so now you're probably starting to question everything you ever learned about Blender, hopefully. And starting to understand why subdivision is so powerful. It's not to say you can't do things like this with the remesher, but we are in complete control of this mesh for the most part because we made the base, we made the basic shapes, we made the panels. And now we're able to do the surface details. And if we wanted to throw hard surface alphas into this, we could also do that as well. Completely up to you, of course. But yeah, we can definitely start working all this out to a much crazier kind of level here. So let me up the resolution on the ones we didn't up in the preview. Yeah, I'm going to grab all of that. Oh, symmetrize that for now. So I'll just give this that gray material real quick so it matches the other one. We'll leave the little pieces here white, right? Just scale it all down a little. So that's the same seat. I used the same reference. This is just the artistry on top, right? Like you can change things later on. Make different kind of designs. You can see just slight little variations. I didn't corner these ones out quite as well as I should have, but yeah, if you want to change the designs and change the patterns or the wrinkles and stuff like that, you know, you're doing those big panels first, and then you're working the smaller stuff. But you got to do the whole seat too. Like there's a whole back side of this that you got to do. There's the sides. You know, panel it all out. It makes it easier. You're gonna struggle with the panels at first. You know, as you get more used to doing this, you can also symmetrize things, by the way. And yeah, as you do this more, it suddenly becomes intuitive, like second nature. Like your quad mesh, base mesh, is going to be what you can do, like a polish pass on, basically, with sculpt tools, possibly. Not that you always have to do that, but it's useful, right? So now you know how to do this, and hopefully it helps you out. So yeah, all of 3D modeling, just polygons. They're triangles, quads, in-poles, e-poles. You kind of see now that, you know, e-poles, in-poles do have an influence on what can happen when it comes to deforming mesh with sculpt tools. And, you know, take this and run with it. This is the best information I think you can get on Blender on how to use it to create the most high fidelity models. It's just pure subdivision, multi-res on top. And then you can throw things like displacement modifiers on top of this even, and then use those if needed. All in all, if you can start working this out here, there's nothing you can't, I don't think, make in Blender personally. You don't really need quad remeshers. You don't necessarily need to worry about doing the whole voxel remeshing always. Just getting the forms, the shapes correct, making a quad mesh, and then sculpting on it at the very end. Simple process. It's maybe a little bit slower. Like there are fast ways to do like mid-poly models and stuff like that, but this is just my opinion, my favorite way of working. So anyways, that's it for this one. I'll check you out in the next one. Hope you enjoyed. Take care.